the maskana of yesterday's?
That the physical world is much closer now to the spiritual world. I'm half expecting at some point to see a message pop up saying the Rebbe is giving another life for Bring.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not just the Rebbe. Baal Shem Tov is having a life for Bring or something like that. Because I don't think there's much difference spiritually for the neshama to be able to impact, like we said last time, after the body passes away. So it says, on the contrary, the bigger a tzaddik is, the more impact he continues to have, the more he inspires his students. But
I'll be hiding under the table.
you can be hiding under the table. It's fine. If you saw him in his life, then there's more chance that you would be attuned to this.
Okay.
You'd be on the right channel.
Does going to the Baal Shem Tov shul count?
I think, again, that was the question we raised at the end, of whether learning from his teachings without having seen him is enough. Because a lot of people hang on to the coattails of different great people. Mm-hmm. And the question is whether they are really nullifying their understanding to try to understand what this great person wrote and how he lived, or whether they're just using his text for their own agenda.
You've been to the Baal Shem Tov shul?
It's not the real shul, unfortunately. It's a reconstruction.
Reconstruction of what it was.
Well, they hope it's in the right place. I have the pictures of what it looked like before they reconstructed it.
Yeah,
it was a mound of dirt. There's nothing there.
Right, except for the floor. Moshe Beck, there was a guy called Rabbi Beck, and his grandson had the plans.
Uh-huh.
But it's a very mystical place.
Oh, I love it. It's the best place in the world to daven. I think I spent. I don't have a nagging need to get to anywhere in the world except for Mezhibush and Haditch. Haditch is. Pshischa would be nice, but it's not a nagging need. Yeah, but it's not a nagging need. It's not the same type. Anyway.
All right, weiter.
Okay.
So we were explaining.
So we were now in Rav Leivik explaining the Zohar.
These are not his original words. This is how the Rebbe rewrote it?
No. These are his words. This is how he wrote it. Ve'esh lefaresh od. Right? We're in the second paragraph in Daf Nun Vav. ויש לפרש עוד, ויובן גם כן השייכות לזה, היינו מה שאמר תסתלק מעלמא וישתר עלמא יתום מנך. So, to understand this more deeply, what he meant by saying, using this metaphor, that the world will remain orphaned from you. Oh, hold on. כי רבי שמעון הוא בדוגמה כמו מוישה. Huh? Yeah, sure. Rabbi Shimon is like Moshe Rabbeinu. כי Moshe הוא בחינת דעת. That's what we saw in the Zohar, right? We saw that Moshe...
You said that David HaMelech was like Moshe Rabbeinu because he received, the direct word, and then he took every word from Hashem and he wrote it and it came out as Tehillim.
Good.
As opposed to Moshe Rabbeinu, what he wrote out and came out as the Chumash. So you want to say that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was also the direct line and he got all the words?
Okay, but not the whole Chumash, just Dvarim. Not the whole Chumash. The whole Chumash is word for word from Hashem. even Dvarim is in the end word for word from Hashem. It's just that according to many of the opinions, what happened was that after Moshe Rabbeinu said these things, Hashem told him to write them down. Okay. Word for word, meaning Hashem was like the stenographer. He remembered what he said, or he said, "This is what I meant to say."
Okay.
By Tehillim, David is completely in that sense. He writes what he wants to say, and it turns out that it's a nevuah. It's a level of Ruach HaKodesh at least. Okay,
so where's Rabbi Shimon?
And Rabbi Shimon, he's like Moshe Rabbeinu in the sense. Again, what he means by all of them, by Rabbi Shimon and Moshe Rabbeinu being both dat, is that they both have the same type of connection with Hashem. Whether it means that they hear something or don't hear something is not the point. It's more from milamata lemala. Let's see what he says. So Rabbi Shimon is like Moshe Rabbeinu. Ki hinei Moshe atzmo zachal aspak la'ara denahara שהם ג' אורות הסתומים דקיימה על היי דלא נהרה מלמעלה. So, Moshe Rabbeinu, his specialty was, his uniqueness, was that he received from this transparent light, the transparent pain. And because of that, he was able to see the three higher sfirot, Keter, Chochmah, and Bina. והאבות זכו לראות הגימל אורות הללו באמצעות מתוך אספקלריה דלא נהרה. The Avos also, the patriarchs, they saw wisdom, understanding, and crown. But the way they saw it was through a translucent pain. ושאר בני העלמא רק מאספקלריה דלא נהרה בלבד. And the rest of the people of the world can only see through the translucent pain. שהסוד הזה גילה רבי שמעון בדרשתו.
What's the difference between a regular person and the others?
That the Avos were one and the same with Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferes. Because we all have a certain aspect of Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferes, of the patriarchs in us, so from those we can also see, like through a translucent pain, wisdom, understanding, and crown. But how did Rashbi know this? How can you know what's behind the curtain? How do you know that Moshe Rabbeinu sees it differently? So if he doesn't see what Moshe Rabbeinu sees, okay, he doesn't see the same source, he sees what he sees, like he sees the way in which he sees. So in that sense, Rabbi Shimon, to be able to describe these things, has to have an understanding of Moshe Rabbeinu.
So there's a question in Tanya. How can someone who's not on that level? So he says because he's in union of Chochmah.
Okay, because you have Chochmah. Because you have Chochmah, then you're able to see at that level.
Does that mean you can see it because you have Chochmah, or you can understand it? You can
No, so again, so it's not saying that Rabbi Shimon had the same level as Moshe Rabbeinu, but he understood Moshe Rabbeinu's level. At least that. Kmo Moshe, okay, sorry. וזהו שאמר רבי אלעזר, רבי אבא, כדסתלק מעלמא, הוא שהסתלק רבי שמעון, שהוא על דרך כמו משה שזכה לאספקלריה דנהרה, הסתלק מעל בבחינה זו. והשתער עלמא יתום מנח, ושלא יהיה בעולם גם הבחינה השנייה הוא, שהוא שלא יאיר וימשך בנד אספקלריה דנהרה, ג' האורות העליונים, מבחינת רבי שמעון, באמצעות הדלא נהרה, וישאר רק אספקלריה דלא נהרה בלבד, הזמן יוכל להנהרה מילין דאורייתא. So he says, so since Rabbi Shimon can see what Moshe Rabbeinu saw, it's true that he sees it also through the Avos. He sees it like the patriarchs, through his wisdom, through his Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes. But the rest of the world can't even see what they saw. I didn't say it right before. The rest of the world can only see the Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes. They can only see the bottom seven, the bottom sfirot. They can't see the top three. They really can't see them.
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai telling him all this story?
He's not. He gave his thing in the beginning. The question.
He wasn't on the same level as him.
He was, but it's not. He wasn't inspired here. There's more to the Zohar. We didn't read all of it.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm saying Bechlal.
Bechlal, he definitely has a role. But here I don't remember that there was a part of the Zohar that Levi Yitzchak skipped. I don't think he's mentioned there either. I think it's all a long drasha from Rabbi Shimon. So I don't remember that Rabbi Elazar is inspired here. But many times in the Zohar, after Rabbi Shimon says something, Rabbi Elazar is also inspired. It's just that we don't see this passage of what will happen when you're not here in the world anymore, and how will we be inspired. So just to order it again. The Moshe Rabbeinu sees from the transparent pain. The patriarchs see through a translucent pain what Moshe Rabbeinu saw. The rest of the world can only see the translucent pain, but they can't see beyond it to see what Moshe Rabbeinu saw. But in that sense, Rabbi Shimon, he's like the patriarchs, because he can see what Moshe Rabbeinu saw, but through a translucent pain. In that sense, he's different. So says the Rebbe's father, that's what Rabbi Abba meant, and when you leave the world, there will no longer be somebody who, like the patriarchs, can see what Moshe Rabbeinu saw, but through a translucent pain. So that's the second point. Okay, so now we didn't mention this yet. But in the Zohar, all the figures themselves are corresponded to a particular sphere, to one of the sfirot. So Rabbi Abba is usually Bina. Okay. So here he says, Masha Rabbi Abba dafka b'chinat Bina. Okay. Rabbi Shimon is Dat, like you just said. Okay. Rabbi Lazar, I don't remember for some reason. Rabbi Yitzchak is Yesod. Rabbi Yehuda is Chesed. See if I remember I don't remember everybody, but it's in the commentaries on the Zohar on the Idra. In the Idra there were 10 people, Rabbi Shimon and 9 students, amongst them Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yitzchak. And in the commentaries they correspond the different figures in the Idra to the Idra Rava, where there were still 10, to the Sfirot. So Rabbi Abba there, it's very interesting. His name is Abba. You would think that he was wisdom. He'd be Chochmah. But he's Bina. So it's very interesting how they understand this. So, Masha Rabbi Abba dafka b'chinat Bina b'cha v'amar zeh. Rabbi Abba shu b'chinat Bina shekol kiyumo talui b'dat. So he says, why is it Rabbi Abba, like you said, why wasn't Rabbi Elazar who said this? Or why specifically in the Zohar is it written as Rabbi Abba said this? Because he's Bina, he's understanding, and we know that understanding is dependent on knowledge, on Dat. That's the famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Im ein Dat, ein Bina. Right? If there's no Dat, there's also no understanding. If there's no ability to, there it means, if there's no ability to distinguish, to separate things, then there's no ability to compare them. Bina is usually the power of comparison. Medamem milta le milta. Compare one thing to another. So Bina sees patterns. But if you can't see the difference between two things in the first place, then you can't see the pattern repeat. You're just seeing the same thing. When I started learning, I had a very, very great Talmid Chacham as my Chavrusa in the Gemara. And I remember that he told me a few times, until you don't understand fully, 100%, there's no connection between the two sides of a machlokas. I mean, they're completely diametrically opposed. It's like one is saying white and one is saying black. If you don't understand the machlokas, if you don't understand the dispute at that level, you can't begin to unify things. You can't begin to paskin. You can't begin to do anything because you don't fully understand their arguments. But you have to first distinguish between them fully. And that's the great thing that Jews do, I think, because they learn Gemara, that other people are not used to doing. Because in the end, there's a tendency in the world to seek unity.
Compromise.
Yeah, or to compromise, or something like that. And there's not a lot of willingness to stand in a very uncomfortable place or like to really research until you understand exactly what the difference is, to be able to define it 100%. This is the difference between these two opinions. And to be able to say it in one succinct phrase, right? It's supposed to be something very clear-cut, that you can really cut between them. So he says here that if there's no doubt, if there's no ability of knowledge, which is the power of differentiation, there's no bina, there's no understanding. And therefore, Rabbi Abba, he's crying more, or he's more saddened. He's the one who says these words about Rabbi Shimon when he passes, that it won't have any more inspiration. Bcha, מה יהיה כדי להסתלק מעלמא? ואמור שם, אם אין בינה אין דעת, ועל דרך, כמו שאמר רבי אבא, לא היה כותב את ספר הזוהר, לא היו יודעינן את הסודות שגילה רבי שמעון. We have another thing, that as we mentioned, the scribe of the Zohar, the one who was sitting and actually writing down, could be that it wasn't actually writing down, could be it was memorizing, writing in his head, but who was writing it down for posterity, these teachings, was Rabbi Abba. So in this sense, he's really dependent on Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon's the center of the whole Zohar. כשיסתלק רבי שמעון מבחינת דת, אז אין בינה שיסתלקו מרבי אבא אורות אימא. So therefore, when Rabbi Shimon will be gone, Rabbi Abba will no longer have the lights of understanding. He won't have the energy of understanding. והוא אמר וי כדי תסתלק מעלמא, מן יחיל להנהר המילן דאורייתא, כי אם שרבי אבא כתב הסודות שגילה רבי שמעון, אך אינו דומה כלל הכתוב בספר להשמיע מפי הרב עצמו. Here we have again that even though he was the one who committed it to memory or that wrote it down, it's not the same to have it memorized or to have it in front of you in a book and to hear it from the source itself, from the teacher himself. Because in the book you can only write down the words, and you're lacking, like we said yesterday, the light of the face of the rabbi who said it, the teacher who said it. Which is not the same when you hear it from the teacher. When you see his face, the light comes from the face, not from the words. And that's why Isaiah says, and your eyes should see the face of your teacher. ועל פי האמור בכאן יובן גם כן ואת תשאפיר מה שרבי אבא פתח בפסוק ואמרתם כה לחי והיה יכול לגלות הסודות שבפסוק זה שאין זה סותר למה שאמר מקודם מן יכיל להנהרה כי זהו דווקא כשיסתלק רבי שמעון אז מן יכול להנהרה אבל כשהוא בחיים חיותו אז יכול רבי אבא בינה לדרוש ולגלות כי הרי כשיש דעת רבי שמעון יש בינה רבי אבא ואדרבה על ידי דרשת רבי שמעון נתגלה לו רבי אבא הסוד שבפסוק ואמרתם כה לחי שהוא על דרך דרשת רבי שמעון היינו על פי דרשת רבי שמעון יובן הפסוק הזה הוא כאין דרשתו. Okay, so now he says, now we have to get into what actually he said. Because this was the main point. The main point was that what Rabbi Abba said about Kol Echai, about this blessing that David gave Naval, but really was blessing God, and therefore, and so on. This was all related to our Parsha, to Va'era. This was all a continuation, inspired by what Rabbi Abba had heard from Rabbi Shimon about Va'era, about these lights that the patriarchs saw, and that they couldn't see what was above them, they only see it through the translucent pane, and so on. It's all related. How? V'amaltem ko. You should say so. And ko, kaf he. So this word kaf he is the word that's most related to kingdom, to malchus. למה? כה הוא בחינת מלכות שיספק לאריה שלו נהרה שממנה נבואת כל השערי נביאים שהתנבאו בכו. The sages say in Yevamos that Moshe Rabbeinu, he has a special level of prophecy which is called this is what God said. The rest of the prophets, all the other prophets ever, they all don't receive from the transparent pane, they receive through a translucent pane. This translucent pane is Malchus, is kingdom. And they start their prophecies with ko, so said. It's not the same as saying this is what God said. It's saying so. So is like approximately, not exactly. We can't see exactly what God said. We can only see approximately. So ko, when the verse that Rabbi Abba is now teaching, Ko lechai, okay, starts with this word ko. So it's almost like saying that David here is prophesizing. It's not so incredible to say that because there's a whole question if David was a prophet or not. Was King David a prophet or not? The Rebbe has a long sikha about this. When he escorted the ark into Yerushalayim, he was wearing the David Chagur Ephod Bad. It says he was wearing an apron that was worn by one of two types of people, either by a priest or by a prophet. We know that he wasn't a priest, so perhaps he was a prophet. So there's a whole question about whether he was a prophet or not. And again, I don't want to get into it, but in this case he says ko. Shneo, אתה יכול לפתוח? Shneo. I have to go down to open the door. Sorry.
Monsieur?
I hope so. Vega. Sorry about that.
What happened to all your WhatsApp messages now? They just disappear? You don't get
No,
them?
I'm not getting anything. I think they heard that I don't like censorship and they threw me out anyway. Anyway,
How did you get my message this morning?
once in a while I get something. אנחנו באמצע הלימוד.
קראת לי?
בסדר, הכל בסדר.
שלום יעקב.
Shalom.
Okay. So, והיה יכול לגלות את הסודות שבפסוק זה. So he started off with this, and so the rest of the prophets, they start with so, which is approximately. So David here is using call it the linguistic churn of prophecy, ko. But specifically, prophecy comes from Malchus. In Tikkunei Zohar, there's a whole long section about, he analyzes how different prophets saw through kingdom, through Malchus. And he gives a rundown. He saw from here. Usually we say that all the prophets see through Netzach and Hod. You don't say that they saw from Malchus. So right away he has to explain that what we mean that they saw through Netzach and Hod, through those two sfirot, is really the Netzach Hod of Malchus. But then the question becomes, the Malchus in which world, and so on. There's a lot of detail when you say that they saw from kingdom. In any case, הנה ואמרתם כל החי שצריך לקשר בחינת כועס בקלר דלא נהרה דמלכות לבחינת חי ליסוד הנקרא חי. So what does it mean כל החי? So peace or so life can be upon you. אמרתם כל החי, you say כל החי. This blessing that he gave Naval. So the chai is always the yesod. And the living is always referring to the yesod, to the foundation. There's a lot of reasons for that. We'll get into them now. אך דקדוק לשון הזוהר הקדוש לכל חי באיטליאן לא משמע שקאי יסוד. But the continuation that the Zohar says that all life is dependent on it, that doesn't sound like it's talking about the foundation, about yesod. ולזאת מחברת יותר לפרש שלחי קאי על חוכמה. So even though normally Chai refers to foundation, and you would think that Kol Chai is the connection between, is the unification. All of Kabbalah is unifications. So it's a unification between kingdom and foundation. He says here it makes more sense that Chaim, Chacham is equal to Chaim. 68. So Chaim sometimes refers also to Chachma, to wisdom. Kabbalah is like that. You have to have a chush. You have to have a sense. Why here would Chaim not be, or Chai wouldn't be like it normally is the foundation, the Yesod? So because it doesn't fit. It's not. It's much more alive. Again, when you read the Arizal, if you don't have any background, it sounds to you like he's just taking this out of thin air. What I mean by background is if you haven't studied Medrash, if you haven't studied a lot of Gemara, if you're not well versed in the sages' terminology, how they think and how they work, you read it, it sounds like a recipe book. You take this, you take this, you take this, you pour this into this, and then it comes out. So that's how most people read recipe books. It's like you have to do this, 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 and this, and you get a cake. But a chef will probably not use a recipe book because he has a chush, he has a sense about it. He says, oh, here it says you should put nutmeg in, but really, it's not going to work. Or nutmeg isn't fresh today. So I have to put something else in. When you're versed in it, then it actually makes sense why he does this. And so in this case, he says, that's what I mean. He's a higher level mekubal than most are. Because he's not just memorizing. You know, in the Sephardi Kabbalah, there's a tradition not to change anything from the recipes of the Arizal. You can't change anything. He says, you don't change. It's not that we change. What the Arizal says is a good recipe. It works great. I think we talked about this once, that all the kavanos of the Arizal were just, again, in Chassidus, this is the explanation. It's what he thought of during one day that he davened. So all the kavanos that he had on davening was that he had that one day. He didn't have time to explain what he thought about the second day, because it took him 18 months just to explain what he thought about one day. And it's the whole thing that among the Kabbalists, the higher level is called a mechaven. is somebody who not only knows the recipes, but he actually uses them when he davens. When he prays, he's thinking of what the Arizal said. To master that takes a few years. But that was what the Arizal thought about in one day that he davened. I mean, there's many intentions that there can be. It's not some kind of, we're not building it's not witchcraft. You put in the tail of a donkey and this or that. It's not nothing like that. It's alive. So in the same way here, so he says here, foundation, Yesod doesn't fit. So it must be Chokhmah. It says he chose another place. I said the gematria. The well-known gematria is that Chaim equals Chacham. Both equal to 68. Okay. Here he brings another well-known pasuk that he quotes in the Tanya many times. That wisdom gives life to its owner. And about Chachma, it fits to say that all life is dependent on it. Because everything is taken from wisdom. What do you mean everything is taken from wisdom? As it says, Kulam b'chokhmah asita, that when God created the world, He used His wisdom. So you made them all with wisdom. Well, how do we explain that in Chassidus? We say it means that the only reason that anything is alive is because deep down, somewhere it has a point of nullification to God. Everything is nullified at some level to God. That's why there's nothing that's really, really independent. So to connect wisdom and malchus, wisdom and kingdom, chokhmah and malchus together, that specifically happens in Rosh Hashanah. Why? she'az nimshach ha'chaim min ha'chokhmah techayeh la'malchut, k'mo she'katuv b'chokhmah yasad eretz. So on Rosh Hashanah, what do? We take the nullification that we have before the king, before Hashem, and we use that and we keep praying for life to bring down into kingdom, into this world. And that's what we mean that there has to be new light that comes down every Rosh Hashanah. But you notice that the pasuk that he mentions now, the connection between Chokhmah and Malchus, between wisdom and kingdom, is Hashem b'Chokhmah Yasad Eretz. In the middle you have Yasad. What does Yasad mean? He founded. So you see the Yasod is there anyway. He's just saying that it's not enough. What he's really saying is that what we know usually, the Yasod is Chai. That's also true here. But it's not enough. So it goes through the Chai. It goes through the Yasod. It goes through its foundation. But really, we have to go further up. Really, the Chaim here refers to wisdom. So, okay, in any case, we're going to skip now to the Rebbe. Where are you? Okay, so he goes on, and there's a lot more. There's a lot more very interesting things that he says here, but we want to get to the Rebbe. What is the application of this in our lives, in serving Hashem? הגענו לכל הראש מסיפור הזוהר אודות בחירתו של רבי אבא, שכיוון שגם פרט זה נכתב בזוהר, הרי זה נעשה חלק בתורה מלשון הוראה. Since this is a story in the Zohar, it's part of the Torah, and all Torah, according to the Rebbe, the correct etymology of the word Torah is instruction. הוראה. So there must be an instruction in this. ועל דרך מאמר הזן, נבואה שהוצרכה לדורות נכתבה. And only things that are needed for future generations were put down into writing. ויש לבאר זה על פי מאמר הז"ל על הפסוק ציון היא דורש אין לה מכלל דבעי הדרישה. The sages bring the pasuk from Yirmiyahu. Tzion hi, it's Tzion, it's called Zion. Doresh אין לה, there's nobody who's seeking it, there's nobody who's searching for it. מכלל דבעי הדרישה, meaning that Zion needs to be sought after. The Tzion needs to be, it's something that needs to be sought. היינו שפעולת הדרישה עצמה ממהרת ומזרזת את הגאולה. And here it's talking about Jeremiah there is talking about the redemption, the final redemption. So it means that seeking quickens or hastens the redemption. ועל דרך זה יש לומר בנידון דידן, שהבחייה הווי כתסתלק מעלמא בחייו ובפניו של רשב"י פועלת שלא יסתלק מעלמא. So he says, what we learn from this is, why did Rabbi Abba actually cry and say, what will be when you're gone, Rabbi Shimon? Because crying in front of the person who, your teacher, crying in front of your teacher, people are afraid to do that. They think it's not nice. It's not good. I'm sitting in front of my teacher. I begin to cry and say, "What will happen when you lose? When I lose you? What will happen when you'll be gone from the world?" So he says, this itself is the seeking after to prevent it. And some things, to prevent them, you have to seek them.
Okay.
You have to want it to be this way. You have to want it to be that he won't leave the world. What does this mean? Asbara b'zeh. B'chiyah zu, so the explanation to this is, and so first of all, that's the application, that's the instruction. It's a very surprising instruction. People don't do this. Let's see, maybe I'll change it later. From what I remember, he doesn't change it. B'chiyah zu madgisha uva mitzad gola le'ikashrut l'rabo. The crying, if you can't cry, it means that your connection to your Rav is not as big as you think it is. If it doesn't bring you to tears to think, if you're not sick and thinking about his departure from this world, then your iskashrus, your connection is not as strong as you think it is. Because this comes from the connection. Especially when you hear great things in Torah from him. As in our case, especially in this case, since Rabbi Abba was inspired by what Rashbi said, and he cried. So there was a connection from the Torah that he heard. And if you don't cry before, there won't be a connection after. On the one hand, it hinders, it stops the process of the teacher departing the world. It slows it down, so it'll happen a long time from now, God willing. But also, that's what your future connection to your teacher after he's departed depends on. So if you didn't cry before, the connection after he departs won't be as strong. As we know that the shepherds of Israel don't leave their flock. When we say they don't leave their flock, we first of all mean the people that they took care of when they were alive. And when they were alive, so many of them took care of so many people. So these people, they have a feeling, I think that it's human nature that when you feel that somebody really took care of you, somebody really gave from himself. So human nature is that you feel connected to them. And when you hear that suddenly that they're sick maybe, or something like that, so obviously you
want to help.
You can. But I don't know if everybody cries. He says that crying is a sign of the connection that will be after they've departed. As the, I don't think it's the Friediger Rebbe, I think it's the Rashab, right? The Rashab said this. Ich gehe in Himmel und ich so ihm lo sich eichdo. That's what Rashab said. For some reason it says here, Kvod Gushat Admor Nishmato Eden, which supposedly should have meant the Friediger Rebbe, even though it doesn't say Moach. It usually says Mori v'chami when he's talking about him. In any case, so maybe he's talking about the Rashab, that I'm going to heaven and I'm leaving you the writings. כי על ידי הלימוד בהכתבים שהשאיר אחריו, שבהם הכניס את עצמותו, כמאמר אנא שכתביתי אבית, וצדיקים דומים לבוראן. הרי זה כמו שנמצא בעצמו כאן. So the writings that he leaves after him are like he himself being here. היינו, שעל ידי הלימוד בתורתו לוקחים אותו.
The writings are as if he's here.
What?
So the writings are as if he's here.
As if he's here. But again, you have to have cried. כמאמר הזה על הפסוק, ויקחו לי תרומה, שעל ידי לימוד התורה, אותי אתם לוקחים. That by taking the donation for the tabernacle, says Hashem, it's as if you're taking me. So when you take the writings, when you buy the writings of the teacher, you have them in your possession, it's as if you have him. ועניין זה מודגש גם בדברי אבי אדוני מורי ורבי בדיוק לשון הזר בבחירתו של רבי אבא. ואי כדיסטלק מעלמא וישתער עלמא יתום מנח. This is also stressed in what my father, says the Rebbe, what Levi Yitzchak wrote about the words that the world will remain orphaned from you. Shal that the addition that the world will remain orphaned, he shelo yiyu gam talmidav Azman yachil anara. When he has no more students, no more disciples, how can he light in the world? How can he bring his light down? Because just the fact that he's departed is not reason enough for there not being somebody who can continue to illuminate the same Torah that he had. Because those students who remain after him, who were with him and learned from him and cried when he was even alive, those students, they will have from that same illumination. They will continue to be inspired by him as if he's alive. From this we learn that just by learning his Torah, as a result of being so connected to his teacher, which was expressed by his crying, so the very essence of the teacher continues to inspire the student as if the teacher is still alive. And therefore, there's no more situation. You can't say, as long as the students are still alive, you can't say that the teacher is gone. He's still here in the world in the same way. His essence is still here. And there's very strong things that the Rebbe is saying. People don't, as long as there's still students of the Rebbe is here entirely.
Right.
Without any question. And you can see it. Anytime that you see a shaliach, somebody that the Rebbe sent. Good. The Rebbe, and especially the ones that you know they cried. There's no question that they cried. A lot of people cried. I remember how people cried in 1991 and 2. I remember there was outside Beth Israel in Manhattan, there was a constant wall. There was a wall that was somewhere under the where the Rebbe was hospitalized. I was at that time in America, and I wasn't in Lubavitcher, but I knew about that wall, and I went to see it, and I think I went to say Tehillim with people there. There was a constant presence, 24 hours a day. There were people crying under that wall. People were my age, and I was 20 then, so that was the age. But there were older people, younger people. Many of the older people are no longer here, but a lot of the younger people that cried, they're still there. They're still here. Then you need to go. So we'll continue with Beis and Gimel and Daled and Hey and Vav tomorrow.
All of them?
Yeah, why not?
You're Swedish.
All the more reason. We're going to learn at 8:30?
Double thing.
11?
Yeah, these are
8:30. Okay.
What do I do if I want to speak to you? No WhatsApp.